Drinking alcohol, smoking, and drug use are harmful to health.
The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as Mia and Ethan trudged through the woods, their boots crunching against the carpet of fallen leaves. The late October sun hung low, casting long shadows that twisted like fingers across the forest floor. They were miles from the nearest town, deep in the Adirondack Mountains, chasing a thrill that had seemed like a good idea back at the diner over greasy fries and lukewarm coffee. "It's just an old estate," Ethan had said, his eyes glinting with that reckless spark Mia both loved and feared. "Abandoned for decades. Nobody's gonna care if we poke around." Mia wasn't so sure. The rumors about the Blackwood Estate were the kind that clung to you. Whispers of missing hikers, strange lights in the windows, and a groundskeeper who'd vanished without a trace. But Ethan had a way of making the impossible sound reasonable, and Mia, as always, followed him into the unknown. They'd found the rusted iron fence after an hour of hiking, its bars half swallowed by creeping vines. A faded no trespassing sign hung crookedly, its letters barely legible. Ethan grinned, tossing his backpack over the fence. "You coming, or you gonna chicken out?" Mia rolled her eyes, ignoring the knot in her stomach. "You're an idiot," she muttered. But she climbed over after him, the metal cold against her palms. The estate loomed ahead, a sprawling mansion of crumbling stone and shattered windows, its gables jutting like broken teeth against the sky. The forest seemed to hold its breath as they approached, the usual chorus of birds and rustling leaves falling silent. Mia's skin prickled, but Ethan was already striding toward the front door, his flashlight beam cutting through the dusk. "Looks like nobody's home," he called, his voice echoing oddly in the stillness. The door, warped and splintered, creaked open with a single push. Mia hesitated, glancing back at the fence, now barely visible through the trees. The air felt heavier here, like it was pressing down on her chest. Inside, the mansion smelled of mildew and something sharper, like old metal. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the boarded windows. The foyer was grand once, with a sweeping staircase and a chandelier that now hung lopsided, its crystals dulled by grime. Ethan swept his flashlight across the walls, revealing faded wallpaper peeling like dead skin. "Check this out," he said, pointing to a portrait above the fireplace. It depicted a stern-faced man in a high-collared suit, his eyes seeming to follow them as they moved. The plaque beneath read, "Elias Blackwood, 1892. "Creepy," Mia whispered, her voice swallowed by the vastness of the room. She tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Maybe we should go. This place doesn't feel right." He laughed, the sound too loud in the silence. "Don't tell me you're buying into the ghost stories. Come on, let's see what's upstairs." Reluctantly, she followed him up the staircase, each step groaning under their weight. The second floor was a maze of hallways, doors hanging ajar to reveal rooms frozen in time. Beds with moth-eaten linens, desks cluttered with yellowed papers, a child's rocking horse tipped over in a corner. Mia's flashlight caught glints of broken glass and cobwebs, but it was the silence that unnerved her most. It wasn't just quiet. It was oppressive, like the house was listening. In one room, they found a journal, its leather cover cracked and brittle. Ethan flipped it open, scanning the spidery handwriting. "Listen to this," he said, reading aloud. "October 12th, 1897. The voices grow louder at night. They call from the hollow, begging me to join them. I cannot resist much longer." Mia shivered. "What's the hollow?" Ethan shrugged, closing the journal. "Probably some old well or something. Rich people back then were always losing it, right? Too much inbreeding." She didn't laugh. The word hollow stuck in her mind, sharp and cold. "Let's keep moving," she said, eager to leave the room. They wandered deeper into the house, the air growing colder with each step. In a narrow hallway, Mia noticed scratches on the walls, long, uneven gouges that looked fresh, the wood beneath still pale. "Ethan," she whispered, grabbing his arm. "These weren't here years ago." He frowned, running his fingers over the marks. Probably animals, raccoons or something. But the scratches were too high, too deliberate. Mia's pulse quickened. "We need to go. Now." Before Ethan could argue, a sound echoed through the house, a low, rhythmic thumping, like footsteps on the floor below. They froze, their flashlights casting trembling beams into the dark. The thumping stopped, replaced by a faint scraping, like something being dragged across the floor. "Probably just the house settling," Ethan said, but his voice lacked its usual bravado. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the stairs. "Let's check it out." "Are you insane?" Mia hissed, yanking her hand free. "We're leaving." But Ethan was already moving, his flashlight beam bouncing as he descended the stairs. Cursing under her breath, Mia followed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The foyer was empty, but the front door was now closed, though neither of them had touched it. Ethan tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "What the hell?" he muttered, shoving his shoulder against it. The door held fast, as if sealed by something stronger than rust. The scraping sound came again, closer now, from a hallway to their left. Mia's flashlight caught a glimpse of movement, something low and shapeless, scuttling out of sight. Her breath caught in her throat. "Ethan, we're not alone." He turned, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. "Stay behind me," he said, pulling a pocket knife from his jacket. The blade looked comically small in the vast, shadowed house. They crept toward the hallway, the scraping growing louder, joined by a faint, wet gurgle. Mia's mind raced with images of what could make such a sound. None of them good. The hallway opened into a kitchen, its counters coated in dust, the sink filled with shattered porcelain. The scraping stopped abruptly, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. Then the pantry door rattled. Ethan raised his knife, his hand shaking. "Who's there?" he called, his voice cracking. No answer. The door rattled again, harder, as if something was trying to break through. Mia grabbed his arm. "We need to find another way out. Now!" They backed away, but before they could turn, the pantry door flew open, slamming against the wall. Darkness poured out, thick and unnatural, swallowing the beam of their flashlights. Mia screamed, stumbling backward, as Ethan swung his knife blindly. Something cold and rough brushed against her arm, and she felt a sharp sting, like a burn. "Run!" Ethan shouted, grabbing her and pulling her toward the hallway. They sprinted through the house, their footsteps echoing as the scraping resumed, faster now, pursuing them. Mia's flashlight flickered, then died, leaving them in near darkness. Ethan's beam was their only guide as they stumbled through rooms, knocking over furniture, desperate for an exit. They found a back door in what looked like a servant's quarters, its glass panes cracked, but intact. Ethan kicked it open, and they spilled out into the cold night air, the forest looming around them. Mia glanced back, half expecting to see something following, but the doorway was empty, the house silent once more. They didn't stop running until they reached the fence, scrambling over it with torn clothes and pounding hearts. Only when they were back in the woods, the mansion out of sight, did Mia realize her arm was bleeding. Not a burn, but a deep scratch, the skin around it pale and puckered. "What was that?" she gasped, her voice trembling. Ethan shook his head, his face ashen. "I don't know, but we're not going back." They hiked back to their car in silence, the forest no longer feeling like a sanctuary. Mia kept glancing over her shoulder, certain she'd see something lurking in the shadows. When they finally reached the car, she collapsed into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she examined the scratch on her arm. It wasn't deep, but it throbbed with a strange, pulsing heat. Ethan drove too fast down the winding mountain road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We're fine," he kept saying, as if trying to convince himself. It was just an old house, just our imaginations. But Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them. The scratch on her arm burned hotter with every mile, and in the quiet moments, she thought she heard a faint scraping, like claws on wood, coming from somewhere deep inside her. They didn't talk about it for days. Ethan threw himself into his usual routine: work, beers with friends, pretending nothing had happened. Mia tried to do the same, but the scratch wouldn't heal. It stayed red and raw, the skin around it growing pale and thin, like it was being drained. At night, she dreamed of the Blackwood Estate, of dark shapes moving in the hollow, their voices whispering her name. She started researching the estate, digging through old newspaper archives and local forums. Most of what she found was vague. Stories of disappearances, rumors of a cult that had once used the mansion for rituals. But one article, buried in a 1901 issue of the local paper, mentioned Elias Blackwood, the man in the portrait. He'd been a recluse, obsessed with something he called the Hollow, a place he believed connected the living world to something else. The article ended abruptly, noting his death under mysterious circumstances. Mia showed the article to Ethan, but he brushed it off. "Old news," he said, avoiding her eyes. "You're obsessing." But she wasn't the only one. Ethan started sleeping with the lights on, jumping at every creak in their apartment. One night, she caught him staring at the wall, his face blank, muttering something about the Hollow. When she asked him about it, he snapped out of it, claiming he'd been half asleep. The scratch on Mia's arm began to change. Thin, dark lines spread from it, like veins, creeping up her forearm. She hid them under long sleeves, but the pain was constant, a dull ache that flared at night. She stopped sleeping, afraid of the dreams that waited for her, dreams of a vast, empty space beneath the earth, filled with writhing shapes and a voice that wasn't human. One night, she woke to find Ethan gone. His side of the bed was cold, his shoes missing. Panic seized her as she grabbed her phone and called him, but it went straight to voicemail. She threw on a jacket and drove back to the mountain, the road blurring through her tears. She knew where he'd gone. The Blackwood Estate was darker than she remembered, the moon hidden behind clouds. The fence seemed taller, the no trespassing sign now gleaming as if freshly painted. Mia climbed over, her flashlight shaking in her hand. The mansion's windows stared down at her, black and unyielding. Inside, the air was colder, the silence heavier. "Ethan?" she called, her voice echoing. No answer. She moved through the foyer, past the portrait of Elias Blackwood, whose eyes seemed to glint with something alive. The scratches on the walls were deeper now, some still wet with sap, as if freshly carved. She found Ethan in the kitchen, standing in front of the pantry door. His flashlight lay on the floor, its beam flickering. He was staring at the door, his face slack, his hands hanging limp at his sides. "Ethan," Mia whispered, touching his shoulder. He didn't move. His skin was cold, his eyes fixed on the door, as if seeing something beyond it. The scraping started again, slow and deliberate, coming from inside the pantry. Mia's heart pounded as she grabbed Ethan's arm, trying to pull him away. "We have to go," she said, her voice breaking, but Ethan turned to her, his eyes empty. "It's calling," he said, his voice flat. "The Hollow wants us." Before she could react, he lunged at the pantry door, wrenching it open. Darkness spilled out, thicker than before, curling around him like smoke. Mia screamed as he stepped into it, vanishing as if swallowed whole. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound reverberating through the house. Mia pounded on the door, sobbing, but it wouldn't budge. The scratching grew louder, faster, coming from all around her now. Walls, floor, ceiling. She ran, her flashlight flickering as she stumbled through the house, desperate for an exit. The back door was sealed, the windows boarded tight. The mansion seemed to shift around her, hallways stretching longer, rooms rearranging themselves. In a small, windowless room she hadn't seen before, she found a trapdoor in the floor, its edges marked with the same scratches as the walls. The air around it was frigid, the scratching now a deafening cacophony. Against every instinct, Mia opened it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The Hollow. She didn't want to go down, but the house gave her no choice. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing so thick she could barely breathe. With her flashlight barely working, she descended, each step colder than the last. The staircase spiraled deeper than seemed possible, the walls damp and slick, etched with more scratches, some forming words she couldn't read. At the bottom was a cavern, its walls glistening with something that wasn't water. Shapes moved in the shadows, too many to count, their forms twisting and indistinct. In the center stood Ethan, his back to her, facing a massive, jagged hole in the rock. The Hollow. "Ethan!" Mia screamed, but he didn't turn. The shapes in the shadows moved closer, their forms resolving into something almost human, gaunt, eyeless, their limbs too long, their mouths open in silent screams. The scratch on Mia's arm burned white-hot, the dark veins pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Ethan stepped toward the Hollow, and the shapes surged forward, their claws scraping the stone. Mia lunged, grabbing his arm, but his skin was wrong, cold and rubbery, like something already dead. He turned, his face no longer his own, his eyes black and bottomless. "It's beautiful," he whispered, and the Hollow answered, a low, guttural hum that shook the cavern. Mia stumbled back, her flashlight dying completely. The darkness closed in, the shapes reaching for her, their claws brushing her skin. She ran, blindly, up the stairs, through the house, not stopping until she was outside, gasping in the cold night air. The fence was gone, the forest stretching endlessly around her. She kept running, the scratching sound following, growing fainter, but never stopping. Mia doesn't know how she made it back to town. She doesn't remember the drive, or how she ended up at the police station, babbling about Ethan and the Blackwood Estate. The police searched the woods, but found no fence, no mansion, only an empty clearing where the estate should have been. They called it a hallucination, blamed it on exhaustion or drugs. Mia didn't argue. She knew they wouldn't believe her. The scratch on her arm never healed. The dark veins spread, slow but relentless, creeping up her shoulder, her chest. She doesn't sleep anymore, afraid of the dreams, of the Hollow, of Ethan's empty eyes, of the shapes that still call her name. At night, she hears the scraping, faint but persistent, coming from inside the walls, inside her skin. She knows it's only a matter of time before the Hollow claims her too.